Special council budget meeting. Members of the public were provided with the following methods to watch and or participate in this open meeting. Attend in person at the Farmers Mutual Community Center, Dumfries. Attend electronically via Zoom to observe the meeting or to speak to an item on the agenda. You can watch the live stream by accessing the meeting on Township's YouTube page, and submitted written comments provided to the clerk's division have been provided to the council members and will form part of the public record. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank everyone for joining us this evening. As we come together to serve the community, I ask that we create a welcoming and positive environment for everyone that includes respect. That we listen to each other with care, speak thoughtfully, and engage kindly with one another. Kindness, that we treat everyone, council, staff, and the public with respect and understanding. Inclusion, that we embrace diverse perspectives and respect each other's opinions. Together, we can make this meeting space one where respect, kindness, and inclusion are at the heart of everything we do. Behavior that is disrespectful, disruptive, aggressive, or intimidating will result in those individuals being asked to leave. I'd now like to call the meeting to order and have approval of the agenda. Councilor Roberts.
Moved by myself, second by Councilor Tilley, that council adopt the August 12, 2026 special budget meeting council agenda as presented.
All those in favor? Thank you. All right. I'd now like to do the Indigenous acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Punjabi, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada. And as you heard me speak last night about respect and about our minutes in our opening for our council agenda, that's what they gave us. When we came to this land, they gave us respect. And we lost it. And it is now our job to try to gain back that respect. And they've been very open, and everything I've been at and looked with them, it's been very open and welcoming. And so let's just pause and remember the best of us is when we respect one another. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest or general need to go up? Seeing none. Items for consideration, 6.1, report number FIN 15/2026, 2026 financial update, 6-month variance report. Does any member of the public have any comments on it? Okay. Any members of council have a comment on the report? Seeing none, motion, Councilor Roman, please.
Moved by myself, by Councilor Ossner, that FIN report number 15/2026 be received for the purpose of information.
All those in favor? All right, thank you. Next is 6.2, report number FIN 16/2026, the 2027 budget direction and new treasurer Andrew McNeely, Chief Administrative Officer, will present. Please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A brief presentation on some key elements that are highlighted and drawn from FIN report 16/2026. Obviously, we are influenced tremendously by both economic factors across the world, country, and Ontario. One of the key drivers, because we are also a consumer of goods and services, is obviously the consumer price index. The year over year, we look at June 25 to June 2026 time period. CPI, the consumer price index, was identified at 2.8% year over year. This is above the Bank of Canada's preferred target of 2%. Essentially, they are witnessing external factors that are settling and may cause further inflationary pressures. And this is in part attributed to supply chain disruptions in terms of the availability to get goods. Tariffs coming out of the United States, they could be reciprocal tariffs that we might have put on an American good re-entering into Canada. And the other is the influence of crude oil prices. Essentially, fuel, diesel, gas, that's to power our fleet, are influenced by the price of oil, and more specifically, the retail price for oil. So not only does it affect directly our fleet, and therefore affecting operations, whether it be in public works or recreation or fire department, but more importantly, it's the goods and services we buy from other business interests, because they're passing on the cost of shipping, and it artificially raises the price of those goods and durables. Right now, the Bank of Canada has identified that most of those pressure points attributed to the fluctuating fuel prices have not, as of yet, been fully translated into consumer goods. However, the longer this stays at elevated prices in terms of the purchase of crude oil, it will in time become baked into those consumer goods. And so this is part of that uncertainty and where the CPI may go in the back half of this calendar year and into 2027. So it's put there as a driver because it tremendously influences our purchasing of certain goods and services that are core to our operations and or capital. The other is wage compensation, and that is both what we pay our employees, but also the benefits packages that go along with it. There have been increases in, for example, our benefits package through Sun Life Financial. We're also seeing increases in payroll remittances that we are obligated as an employer to remit off of wages to, excuse me, the federal government related to things like CPP, NEI, and employer health tax. The other is utility costs, and captured within this category is water services, so water, wastewater. If you think of, obviously our facilities, the washrooms and the showers, but it's also our splash pads. Hydroelectricity, as well as natural gas. Our asset management plan and the 10-year capital forecast, we have a very large capital forecast. There's over $129 million spend in the 10-year period. We'll be talking about that a little bit later tonight. But to fund the commitments that are articulated in the 10-year capital forecast, the reality is we collect that through tax levy, and it's a transfer to reserve to smooth out the peaks and valleys in the 10-year capital forecast, so that as projects come up in any given year within the forecast, council, as part of the annual budget, wishes to advance forward with one or more of those projects, the funds are available to deliver on that project. Debt financing for the new net zero arena, both the arena and the Warmside programming room. Council is very much aware that project is well underway. It's targeted to be completed the end of Q1 of 2027. So we have, as part of our funding strategy for that new project, a $5 million debenture. When the project completes, end of Q1, we will have a debenture issued through the region on a 20-year horizon repayment schedule, and we have modeled at 4.75% as the interest on that debt. So because we are partway into the calendar year being 27, we'll only be paying half of the annual installment. So what is shown in the budget as an influencer is 50% of what would be the principal and interest to finance and serve that debenture payment. We have some one-time transitional costs as we sort of migrate out of the Air Community Center being the current ice surface and move to the new net zero arena. We have some costs associated with that building continuing. We'll have a period of time when we've actually got 3 ice surfaces because we'll be testing the 1 ice surface to commission it and demonstrate that the ice plant works and operates as designed with no offsetting revenue, yet there'll be overhead associated with, in this case, electricity to power up the ice plant and draw down the pad and keep the ice firm. And there'll be some staffing adjustments with our part-time personnel as we better understand how we're going to schedule the new net zero arena, as well as the warm side programming space that will be added to our inventory. Because we still have commitments on the warm side at the Air Community Center in the form of the community hall. So it's that recalibration of our staffing as well. So we have what we call the transitional costs that is built into the draft 2027 budget, understanding that relationship. And then our insurance premiums, if I look at the last 2 or 3 years, they've been growing approximately 15% per annum. And that's the reality of the broader insurance portfolio. The reality is there's been bad weather, there's been climatic changes. It's influenced weather patterns that have created issues with flooding, wind or hail damage. There is the cost of the corporate fleet. There's the risk and risk mitigation associated with our road network, park and rec facilities and the like. All of these aspects generally are driving up insurance premiums, well outstripping the rate of inflation. So those are some of the key drivers that are influencing the 2027 operating budget. And in my report, I listed a couple of other aspects that would be above and beyond what's shared on this slide. So staff has proposed a guideline, and I always come before council at this time of year and I ask for guidance to help staff as we try and frame a draft budget, which is then tabled generally in December, and then is debated and analyzed in the January, February time period. We are actually showing a spread here between 6.75% and 9.5%. The reason why in part there's a spread, it's because of the uncertainty of the assessment base and the growth factors that will be applied to the 2027 assessment roll. We won't know actually until December, but usually I'm able to access data in the impact portal this time of year, and I've got a trend line. It's lagging significantly behind. I do know, as a general speaking, because building permit activity has been down the latter part of 2024 through 25, and certainly witnessed in the first half of 2026, that overall construction is down. Well, that drives changes in assessment. That being said, there's a different component that's unique to this coming year. Council, you may recall in 2025, appealed 3 years worth of assessment values for a whole roster of aggregate operations. But we've been working our way through either settlement opportunities to recalibrate the assessed value of those properties and or depositions and filings through those appeals for settlement or review in the assessment review board. How quickly that migrates into the assessment role is unclear. So that's why in part there's a variance because of that significant aspect. The other is normally at this time of year, we've got a signal from our partners at the province of Ontario what the transfer payments are going to be for the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund as well as the Ontario Community Investment Fund. That information hasn't been released. So there are some variables that are unknown. They tremendously influence our baseline budget and hence the spread. So I'm suggesting to you at the high end, if those external factors I mentioned do not materialize, or not to the extent that we believe they should, with those drivers that I've outlined in the staff report, you're at the high end. If those things materialize, then it would be closer to the 6.75% tax rate increase. The key drivers in terms of what makes up those elements, not having fully accounted for potential assessment as an unknown, is 1.8% for wage compensation, 1.8% year-over-year operating increase. And you'll note those two categories are below the 2% benchmark that the Bank of Canada tries to target as inflation. Remembering that in June of 26, the most recent data we have is 2.8%. So every effort has been trying to control our controllable costs. The 2.23% increase represents 50% of the annual installment of the debenture for the new net zero arena. That's fixed. 0.5% for the transitional cost for the Air Community Center, and then the 3% contribution to capital reserves to fund the 10-year capital forecast. This table is the summary of the tax rate across all of the municipalities within Waterloo Region and those municipalities around our edges. So, Blandford Blenheim, County of Brant, Pushlinch, and the like. We grossed everybody up.
Sorry, Andrew. Ashley, is there any way to get that bigger on the screen? Or Eric?
Can you email it to us?
Yes. That tax rate, we grew up to $455,000 because that is the average assessed home. That is the average assessed home in North Dumfries. Our average assessed residence is higher than most of our comparators, but by grossing everybody up to 455,000 and then multiplying it by their tax rate, it shows then truly an apples to apples comparison. And you will see out of that listing of municipalities, North Dumfries has the lowest property tax rate of any of the Waterloo Region area municipalities. And we are the second lowest in that entire grouping of area municipalities. It's also important for people to understand what makes up your property tax bill. Township Council controls the local portion of the property tax bill. Property tax bill is made up of actually three components: the Region of Waterloo, Township of North Dumfries, and the school boards. Township Council, utilizing the 2026 budget and the 2026 tax rate, Township Council controls 27% of what shows up on the tax bill for the average assessed residence. So the average assessed residence at $455,000 based on the tax rates of both the school board, the region, and the township would be paying a property tax bill combined of $5,395. Township is 27% of that valuation, which is equivalent to $1,434 or $135. Okay. You represent 27% of the overall amount collected through the tax bills. The region is the largest at 60%, and school boards represent 13%. So, Madam Mayor, that ends the highlights related to the draft 2027 budget. What staff are asking in our recommendation contained in FIN Report 16/2026 is council signal that we should be drafting the 2027 budget based on the 3% contribution to the capital reserves, which reflects past practice. That the guidance be 6.75 to 9.5% spread on the municipal tax rate. There, we've got the budget schedule in terms of the meetings and the touch points with Township Council. Some represent regular meetings of council. Others would be special dedicated meetings where the item of the day would be the budget itself. And those would be in the 27 January and 27 February time periods. The rest are following normal council dates. And then we'd obviously, if council adopts that broader schedule, we would publish it on our website, and it would be communicated in terms of its schedule so that the public is aware of either future meetings or deliverables tied to one or more of those meetings. So, Madam Mayor, I'm able to answer any questions that council may have on FIN Report 16/2026.
Thank you, CEO McNary. Is there any member of the public that wishes to make a question or comment? Councilors, questions or comments? Seeing none, I believe there should be a motion. Six, I believe Councilor Alford. Yeah.
Okay, moved by myself, second by Council Rowland, that FAN report number 16/2026 be received. And the council establish a transfer to capital reserves of a minimum of 3% of the 2027 municipal levy over the total capital reserves allocated from taxation in 2026 to assist in funding the 10-year capital forecast. And that staff be directed to prepare and submit the 2027 draft operating and capital budget within the guideline of 6.75 to 9.5% increase in the municipal tax rate after accounting for assessment growth. And that staff publish and adopt the adopted 2027 budget meeting schedule in conjunction with the 26-27 council meeting schedule on the township's website, social media accounts as part of the ongoing public consultation and community outreach program. And that the following meetings be scheduled to deal with the 2027 budget components. Wednesday, August 12th, 2026, 6 p.m. special council meeting. Do you want me to read each of the what it's for?
No, just do the dates.
Sorry?
Just do the dates.
Monday, November 9th, 2026, 6 p.m. regular council. Monday, December 14th, 2026, 6 p.m. regular council. Monday and Thursday, January 11th and 12th, 2027, 6 p.m. Special council meeting. Monday, February 1st, 2027, 6 p.m. special council meeting. Monday, February 22nd, 2027, 6 p.m. regular council, and Monday, April 26th, 2027, 6 p.m. regular council for the consideration of the final full tax rate by law.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Next is report number FIN 17/2026, potential cost containment measures to 2027 and future use operating budget.
So, Madam Mayor, if I could, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but maybe what I can do is give some context to council about this report. So you just saw the drivers that are influencing the 2027 draft operating budget. And they're higher than we have been accustomed to. I tried to give the context of what's driving it, but that being said, it's still higher than we are used to. So this discussion paper, as outlined in Fin Report 17/2026, is presented to council to plant a framework for direction and council's comfort level with going back and looking at certain cost centers to see whether or not there are topical areas in the operating budget that could either be rolled back, flatlined, items delayed, all with the objective of trying to bend the curve on a tax rate increase for 2027. Now, I'll be honest with you, a significant portion of the budget is fixed in the context of external contracts and commitments and external factors that we don't influence. We can't set the rate of fuel or the cubic meter cost of natural gas and water, right? However, there are things that are within our control that I would characterize as discretionary. Doesn't mean they're not important, doesn't mean they don't bring value, but they are areas within the purview of council to try and refocus prioritization and commitment to past spending practices or approaches in terms of how we've spent the public dollar. For 2027, I don't think the influence would be dramatic. Probably looking at a 0.25 to a 0.75% in 2027. That's because until the budget's actually approved, you're already partway into 27. But it does assist you in later years if there's success in terms of that path. You have to, if you're going to, you have to start at some point. And this discussion paper tries to provide a context to council where efforts could be directed corporately, and then areas within the respective departments. We've also identified certain things that would not be influenced because they're either contractual, legislative, there are factors outside our control, like buying fuel. We may shape how we use the fuel, but we can't actually set the price. So areas where we could perhaps revisit and how we deliver things. Procurement is one area where we could better leverage group buying purchasing. We do today actively participate in certain buyer groups. However, maybe that's where we start our analysis, and where it doesn't work, then we default back to our traditional buying practices. The impetus is if the program aligns with our standards or specifications for that good or service, and it's available in the time period that we're looking at, the premise of the joint buying group, some are at a provincial scale, some are at a Waterloo region scale, and others are national in scale. And the premise is that the buyers group, whichever level we're talking about, its scale of economy, because of the volume that they're protecting, and had negotiated pre-pricing through one or more vendors for a good service or product. That's a representative example. Training and development is another area, and maybe it's shifting more back to opportunities for webinars as a tool, self-taught webinars that are available through some of our associations. So there are different lenses through this, and the paper tries to identify that screening that we would apply. And then when you see the budget book, we would identify not only the plus or minus versus the 26 expenditure as a contrast, but we would actually identify what's a core service, what's a legislative service, and what was discretionary. so that the next term of council, when they look at the budget, understands where, I'm going to use the word focus would be, because it's truly discretionary spending and you're not lock committed because of a legislative requirement and or a contractual obligation. Those still should be tested and evaluated. I'm not trying to dismiss that, but where you have the most latitude is on that discretionary spending practice. So that is the premise behind Fin Report 17/2026. We're putting it in front of council to determine council's comfort level. And then, if council embraces the recommendation, that's how we would prepare the draft 2027 budget.
Okay, any questions from the public? Any questions from council? Council Roman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to the CEO through you. Energy is one of our higher costs, one of our higher driving costs. Have we done an energy audit? Have we looked at what our heating and cooling costs are for all of our facilities and our lighting costs? And have we looked at somehow shortening down the amount of lighting we're doing or the amount of heating and cooling, perhaps by reducing our hours slightly in certain buildings? Would there be any savings? I know that the savings you identified in the report may give us a small saving, but I feel like the real savings are going to come from looking at our energy costs. So I'm wondering what each department has been able to do in terms of reducing energy costs.
So, Madam Mayor, through the council role, energy costs like lighting, yes, is something that we can control. So the township actually did a network review of all of our facilities. And I apologize, I can't remember whether it was 5 years ago or 6 years ago, but we did do an efficiency energy audit, and there were certain recommendations. And we've been following that. So for example, today, the lighting at the ACC over top of what is the ice surface, we went from metal halide to LED lights. Last year, being 25, we changed out the luminaires, which were era 2011, so they weren't that old. They're now LED. If you were to walk down the hallway at the outside the locker rooms here at the Air Farmers Mutual Community Center, they're actually tripped by motion detectors. It's dark, but once you work your way down the hallway, the sensors trigger movement and the lights come on. They're on a timer, and then if the activity stops, the lights go off. Okay, so we've done that in numerous locales to lower the cost. All of your streets light network is now LEDs. You finished the last part of the street lights in Q1 of 2026. You are now 100% LED streetlights. So the township has made that effort. Your sports field lighting now, whether we're at Jim Schmidt Memorial Park and the ball diamond lighting, or at Vic Park and the ball diamond lighting, or the two tennis court facilities, they're all LED. You change those out, you modernize them. The only sports field lighting that's not been changed out is ComDev soccer pitch, and it's in your forecast. So the township has made those efforts from an energy conservation, from an electrical perspective. We have been, and we are, making changes to our buildings. So we're about 80% of the way through the exterior rehabilitation project at the Air Community Center. Appreciate that building goes back to era 1977. There is very little insulation in that building, and specifically the arena portion of that building. You are going with insulated metal panels, which have a very high R factor. You will be seeing those benefits in terms of energy consumption initially with the ice plant, because you're not going to be quite as heavily influenced by external temperatures. Think of the shoulder seasons. But once the future use of whatever goes into that space, when we have to now convert to a true HVAC system to heat and cool that, understanding 4 seasons use, that investment today on that exterior skin will benefit. Your new net zero arena that's under construction has the highest quality rating of insulation. We have made efforts as we have modernized and undertaken construction-related activity to ensure that we are using the most modern technology and energy conservation practices. That's demonstrated in your new admin building for Public Works at 1168 Greenfield Road that opened up the end of 2024. It also has all of those environmental conservation practices, heating, cooling, insulation, and lighting. So yes, we've made that effort. Where we have outstanding, as these lights come due for renewal, they are being changed out to LED technology. And the last would be the Roseville Community Center, the 1867 era constructed building.
So, McNeely, a while ago, we talked about solar panels here. And you tried to work out a deal with the energy board and were unsuccessful. Their mindset has changed. So you may want to, not saying what the next budget we run that, but you may want to start discussions.
So we have had some very, very high level about leasing the roof opportunity rather than the township having to invest.
Right.
And if a lease was successful, they would be the party responsible for the capital costs, because there is a capital cost on day one. And then there's the removal of the system at the end of its life cycle, which is roughly 20 years. We would just get an annual stipend for the privilege of utilizing the roof service. That has not materialized in a meaningful manner yet. But it doesn't mean it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Well, I think the last meeting I was at, they were discussing potentials. Any other questions, councilors? Councilor Rowley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My other question through the staff, I know we're talking mainly about operating budget, but it was alluded to the other night, the meeting, that we're gonna go over budget on some of our construction projects. So I'm just curious, what impact would those potential overruns have on our budget?
So Madam Mayor, through to Councilor Rowland, I'll start off and any one of the directors can chime in. There is only one project where we have had budgetary pressures, and that was the Footbridge Road. And we brought a full public reporting to Township Council, talked about that the project was within the budget allowance as restructured. However, we asked for additional contingency in the event that something materializes, and it was taking as this underspending on other linear infrastructure projects and was reallocated, if required, to support the footbridge. So that is the only project that's had budgetary issues because of the delay in the ability to advance the project because of the migratory bird issue and our desire to accelerate and double up personnel to have that bridge completed and commissioned by mid-November 2026. But it was outlined in that council report of July 13th. And where those sources of funding was coming from, the amounts, and the rationale in support of that. And council authorized that as an amendment to the 2026 capital budget.
I think council is well aware of all of this.
All of the other capital projects are tracking under budget. There was a comment made at the Monday evening council meeting about the net zero arena that it is over budget. That is factually incorrect. We have reported to council on our quarterly basis, which was our commitment to council, and we have identified that tracking. Our next report to council is actually the first meeting in September on the 14th of September. And that report will identify that we continue to track under budget. Mr. Ray Croft, in his role as the project manager, have been very, very diligent, working with our construction manager, Percon, They've been a very, very responsible partner. And the combination, the relationship between Mr. Raycroft and FERCOT has kept that project on schedule and under budget.
Yeah, I wish certain news were able to hear that tonight. We don't want to put a press release on. Your silence is deafening. Okay, so, motion please, Councilor Tim.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Wilms, that FIN report number 17-2026 be received, and that council embrace the guiding principles and framework of the cost containment practices outlined in FIN report number 17-2026, and direct staff in the preparation of the draft 2027 budget reflection upon, and where practical incorporate these principles into analysis.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. And next we have report number 10/18/2026, preliminary discussion and overview, first draft 10-year capital forecast 2027 to 2036. CAO McFeely will provide a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So each August, staff appear before Township Council to talk about the first draft of the next 10-year capital forecast.
May I interrupt for a second? These are one of the spreadsheets that were sent to us. So if you want to bring it up in your computer, you email them to us. Carry on, sir.
Email the presentation to council so they can follow along.
So every August, we appear before Township Council, we go through the first draft of the next 10-year period. So in this case, obviously, we're looking at the 2027 to 2036 time period. And obviously, the purpose of tonight is to provide an early outline of that 10-year capital forecast. And it's done to help us better understand potential 2027 projects and whether or not they continue to be priorities of Township Council and are consistent with your expectations. We're obviously looking beyond 2027, understanding that some projects are multi-year in their approach and or require coordination with one or more external agencies. Think of natural gas with Enbridge or the region as it relates to water, wastewater systems or the like. We can't do our budget and our capital undertaking in isolation. So sometimes it's because of sequencing of tasks that we need to do. In other cases, it is to inform our partners of what the horizon looks like and where they may plug in. And obviously, we want council's input and that of the community on the proposed funding models used by staff related to the 10-year plan. And obviously, this helps us inform both the financing policy, strategy in terms of how we utilize reserves, taxation, debt, and at the end of the day, the underpinning of why we make reserve transfers through the tax levy as part of each year's operating budget. So there have been changes since council last talked about the 10-year capital forecast in February of 2026 as part of the 2026 capital budget deliberations. Obviously, we've added year 2036, because we always have that 10-year horizon. So we have populated across the various functional areas, projects and the costing forecasted for the back end of the decade, that being 2036. We've made adjustments to the costing of some capital undertakings based on market experience or new information that has become available to us. We want to flag to Township Council that the budget has actually dropped in the 10-year period from the 150 million that was identified in February, and we're now down to approximately 129, 130 million for the 10-year period. And that reduction is largely attributed to the completion or work that's well underway related to the footbridge road, bridge rehabilitation, the exterior rehabilitation at the Air Community Center, and the net zero arena project. Those are your larger cost expenditures that drop off at the end of 26. And obviously are not reflected in the capital forecast for the back end of this decade. Facilities and public works, specifically the linear infrastructure, remain your two top areas of expenditure and the two dominant portfolios in terms of capital expenditure in the 10-year time period. And for the purposes of everyone understanding consistently, when I say linear infrastructure, that captures roads, bridges, stormwater management, sidewalks, and streetlights. So in the 10-year capital forecast, the linear infrastructure system totals approximately $52 million. So you're spending on average about 5.2 million each year over the 10-year horizon. Some years are more or less than others, but a dollar average, you're spending about $5.2 million on the linear infrastructure system over the 10-year horizon. Your forecast in the February 2026 document, by contrast, was approximately 57 million. Facilities. So these are largely your bricks and mortar. It could be the fire hall, the Roseville Community Center, the Air Farmers Mutual Community Center, the library. We own the library on Stanley Street in downtown Air, as well as the Air Community Center. Those are your facilities. What's captured in the budget is either new building, significant renovation, an addition, or your key life cycle renewal projects for one or more of those major building components. Your expenditure over the 10-year horizon is now approximately $39.3 million. So once again, on average, over the 10-year period, you're spending about $3.9 million annually on your facilities from a capital perspective. That is down from the February 2026 forecast, which was at $56 million at that time. So moving to the next slide, this is both in a tabular form as well as a pie graph. Hope the visual helps everyone better understand quantums. So your rolling stock, and that's the fleet across all departments, your spend over the 10-year period, it's approximately $21.2 million, which represents about 16% of the spending in the 10-year capital forecast. Studies, small tools and equipment, software, capital costs, it's approximately $7.4 million, or about 6% of your total capital spend in the 10-year forecast. Infrastructure is your largest category. As I mentioned a moment ago, it's approximately $52 million, or 40% of your capital spend. Facilities, which we talked about a moment ago, it's approximately $39.3 million, or 30% of your overall spend. And then parks, trails, whether it be new parks or trails or renovations, improvements to existing outdoor amenities, is approximately $9.8 million, or 8% of your capital forecast. So we talked about the quantum of the spend, approximately $129 million over the 10-year capital forecast. but it's funded from a myriad of sources, including reserves, government grants, community sponsorship and donation, the Grand Bridge Energy Reserve Transport Parkland Trust development charges, to name a few. So this chart shows your global dollars and then tries to show by a bar chart that spending pattern graphically. So your reserve transfers, so every year we put money into capital reserves. You heard a moment ago in my earlier presentation, consistent with past practice, we're seeking a 3% contribution from the operating budget to go to capital reserves. That transfer grows our reserve accounts and allows us to fund the 10-year capital forecast. Over the 10-year period, if that 3% modeling continues, you are contributing as an aggregate value approximately $26.8 million. Development charges. This is funding secured through both residential and non-residential building permits, where development has a growth-related impact. So it's perhaps capacity to a road, we're upgrading the road. It could be a brand new park in an emerging residential neighborhood. It could be an expansion to our rolling stock because we've got more lane kilometers of public highways to maintain, as examples. So this is funds collected through a building permit for residential, non-residential growth for those projects that are identified as growth related and carried in our forecast. That contribution is approximately $29.3 million. The government grant program would include OCIF, so that's the Ontario Community Investment Fund, as well as the federal gas tax contribution. It totals approximately $11.9 million as an aggregate value. Our community donation and sponsorship. Remember, the Net Zero Arena is no longer in the mix. So this is a go forward. There is approximately $525,000 shown in the 10-year capital forecast as contributions through community donation and sponsorship. And it's largely as contributions to the next phase of the Air Community Center as the adaptive reuse. We have what we call the Bill 124 reserve. So these are funds that are remitted as part of building permit activity. And any year in which we take in more revenue than we expend to operate the building division goes into what we call Bill 124 reserve account. And in slow years, we can draw money out from that reserve account to cover operating costs. And we can fund things that are exclusive to the building division. So in this case, it is a contribution toward their replacement vehicle fleet. As well as software analysis, as well as contributions to reserves, going back to the Bill 124 account, specific to capital. And it's approximately $194,000. Taxation is at $37 million. And this is made up of two components. It's that, working on the premise that future council commits to the 3% capital reserve transfer. That taxation is made up of what would be on the tax levy on an annual basis as the capital reserve transfer to reserves to fund the 10-year capital forecast. And now for the first time, the contribution toward the principal and interest of the debt financing. Initially, the Net Zero Arena. Later, mid-decade, it will be the adaptive reuse of the Air Community Center. And then at the very end of the forecast period, it is the future equipment building for the Public Works Depot. The Grand Bridge Energy Reserve Account, we'd be tapping into approximately $3.7 million to fund the 10-year capital forecast. And for our audience virtually, The Grandbridge Energy Reserve, we're a shareholder in Grandbridge Energy. And we receive a dividend on an annual basis on the net proceeds that they generate. And then it's prorated amongst the three partners, shareholders, which is the city of Brantford, city of Cambridge, and the township of North Dumfries. We're obviously the minority in our shareholder group. However, we receive two different kinds of payments from Grandbridge. One is our annual dividend, and the other is we hold a loan against Grandbridge, and they pay us interest on that loan each year. And it's the combination of the two that go into reserve account called Grandbridge Energy, and we're drawing out certain funds to undertake the capital program. Park Trust is where we take cash in lieu of park land for either residential or non-residential development as permitted under the Planning Act. It's a dedicated reserve account. We give an annual reporting to council as to the account and its reserve continuity. And those funds can only be used on recreation type scope activities. The aggregate reserve account, we're drawing approximately $7.6 million over the 10-year period. And it's largely going to the linear infrastructure fund. And what the aggregate reserve account is, province establishes a fee schedule, and for every ton extracted of aggregate in one or more of our pits, they self-report as an operator to the province, and then they pay whatever the provincial rate is on those tons, and we get a percentage of them. So generally tracking about $950,000 annually. It varies from year to year, but generally $950,000 comes into the township. We'll be utilizing approximately $7.6 million out of all those years to fund road-related projects, bridges, sidewalks, stormwater management, and the road network. And then there's debt. And the aggregate sum of the debt between the three projects, which I'm going to elaborate on in a moment, is approximately $10.8 million. Which gets me to the next slide, which is the debt financing. So this talks about our debt exposure and our funding source. Generally speaking, we would incur the debt the year following the completion of the project. As I mentioned, for the net zero arena, it would be in the back end of calendar year 27. That's why there's only the 50% installment in 27. But if you take a look at the other projects, we've shown it in the year after completion. Okay. And debt payment is made up of both principal and interest. For all three projects, we have modeled a 20-year debt repayment period. So that's the amortization period. And we have modeled at 4.75% as the interest variable on each of those three files. Obviously, as we look out 4 years, 10 years, we have made an estimate on what that interest payment might look like. As you get closer to that anniversary date, you would be able to truth out what that true interest payment would look like. In 2033, so that's when the last of the three projects, that's the Public Works Depot, that would be our highest debt period, because now you've got the net zero arena, the adaptive reuse to the Air Community Center, and then the equipment building attributed to the Public Works Depot. We would be funding a debt payment, principal and interest, of approximately $760,000. My most recent number that's available to me from the province of Ontario is the 2025 repayment limit. We actually are eligible to pay principal and interest up to 2.7 million. So we are at 33, excuse me, we're at 28% in 2033 of what the 25 allowance is. So you can see as a percentage of our own source income, it's relatively small. So as we get closer to 2033, our assessment base will continue to grow. And that number as a percentage should drop because our own source income grows. Tax revenue we generate. Excuse me. You are well within the allowances today. That number will only be more positive as you advance these projects in the latter part of the forecast as a percentage of your own sourced income. And that formula and the output is published annually by the province of Ontario based on your financial information returns. Okay, so the most recent publication is 25. I want to draw to council's attention that the Public Works Building Phase 2, that's the equipment shed, is a blend between both taxation and development charges. Approximately 65% of the capital costs and therefore the annual interest and principal payment would actually be funded through development charges, with only 35% of that carrying cost funded through the tax levy. So you can see in the first chart at the top of the page, we have 27 through to 2036. And we show each of the three projects in the far left-hand column. And then we show what the principal amount of debt that's drawn for each of those projects. So in 27, it's $5 million. If you jump over to the Public Works Phase 2 building in 2033, 8.3 million. And the ACC adaptive reuse, the funds would be drawn in 2029 at approximately $2.5 million. Those are your three projects, their starting date, and what's carried in the capital forecast as your debt exposure. The column or the table at the bottom of the page, once again, for the 27 through 2036 time period, shows what we would be paying through the tax levy in each of those years to fund those projects. So obviously in 27, it's exclusive of the net zero arena. It's the 50% installment of what would be the normal annual contribution at 196,000. You can see in 29, the number grows now to 589,000 because now you've got the net zero arena plus the ACC adaptive reuse. And then in 2033, the contribution for debt financing, tax levy exposure increases to 759,000 because now you've got all three projects and the amount carried through the tax levy for annual contributions for debt care, principal and interest. So our next slide shows taxation funding. We don't fund in year to our capital budget. Council back in 2016, several terms of council ago, made the decision that it was prudent to do two things. One was to have a 10-year capital forecast. What is immediate, what is midterm, what is longer term, what is our gross exposure, what's our risk, what's our funding strategy. And that vision and wisdom of council was driven in part to make sure the projects were sequenced, that reflect community needs and priorities, could be scaled because variables become known during that time period. You make adjustments to the forecast accordingly as new information becomes available. So it's a living, breathing document. More importantly, it informed how much we should be putting into cap reserve to cover the commitments notionally and identified in the 10-year capital forecast, with the intent of having a smoother plane of contributions rather than the up and down variable from year to year as projects are delivered. It also allowed council the confidence that when a project was deemed to be appropriate to be advanced, the funds were available and the project could be delivered. So the taxation funding strategy for the 2036 capital forecast. The chart at the top tries to show both what is taxation as a transfer to reserve, and that generally reflects that 3% contribution annually. You're generating almost 37 million going into cap reserves over that 10-year horizon as an aggregate value. And then each year, you're drawing from those reserves to fund appropriate capital projects. Your debt servicing is the other tax exposure, principal and interest. And your value of debt financing of tax levy over the aggregate of the 10-year period is approximately $5.9 million. This chart shows you each year what those aggregate values are individually by year, and then what the quantum is both by year, the two categories, as well as across the 10-year forecast. And then the bar chart, just try and graphically show you. And as you can see, your transfer to reserves are an incline, a gentle curve, which has reflected our past practice since 2016. This is 15 pages of spreadsheets. So what I'm going to try and do is break down the 15 pages into a manageable bite. I'm certainly more than willing to go through any project on an individual spreadsheet, but for the purposes of brevity and focus, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give you an overview of the key large-scale projects. I'm going to talk about a couple of projects that are not in the 10-year capital forecast, but they're things being studied by the municipality right now that could influence the 10-year capital forecast based on further direction from Township Council, either this council or a future term of council, as well as a very quick summary of what each chart tries to capture. Okay? So your large projects in the 10-year capital forecast, that public works expansion. This was a multi-year project. So we started in 23, we did a master plan. What do we need for a 10 or 15-year horizon? And physically, where do we arrange these buildings or retrofits within the envelope of the property from a function, form, circulation perspective, scale to meet the community today and for the longer term. So we started with the master plan. We've completed phase one, which was the admin building for the public works staff, as well as the commodity bunkers. That's now completed. That was largely done in 24. We have the phase construction now of the outstanding aspects. So in 2032 is the new equipment building to house the inventory of our fleet, shops, and a new wash bay, as well as a new fuel depot. And then in 2034 is phase three, and that's a new salt dome, sand dome structure. Because the life cycle of the existing building will have now been expended. It'll approach approximately 50 years. Council put money into that building 3 years ago to extend its life. But as we move into the middle part of the next decade, we will be at its life cycle replacement. Partly because of age, partly because of capacity, adding the extra lane kilometers in the road network. The other is the major rehabilitation of the Air Community Center. Obviously, that work is well underway. It should be completed by the end of September. And it was important because it set the table for the next steps of investment in that building. Council needed to secure the building, extend its operating life for at least another 30 years. Hence why the investment in repairing the wall systems, the foundation, insulating the building, extending the life of the roof, and improving drainage. And because of the extensive site disturbance, it's generated a new parking lot on the east and west side in terms of new surface and drainage. The twinning of the arena at the Air Farmers Mutual Community Center and the additional programming rooms that are added as part of that new build. Obviously, the construction window is 26, as well as the early part of 27. That project is well underway, and it'll be completed at the end of Q1 2027, and then would be available as programming space, warm and cold sides, to complement what already exists here at the Air Farmers Mutual Community Center. It's positioned for our longer term recreation, leisure needs. These two projects are important. The reason why I put them here is because while they're largely in the rearview mirror, they inform the next major project, which is the adaptive reuse of the Air Community Center, and specifically the ice surface. We will not have 3 ice surfaces. We will have the twin pad here. And council did not want to see a largely empty building. So the premise was there would be an adaptive reuse of what was historically dedicated to the ice surface at the ACC. And council's now embarked upon a program of community engagement and consultation to better understand community needs, what that order of magnitude is, what the space allocation could look like, and whether or not that type of activity that's maybe coming through that analysis can actually be appropriately fitted or accommodated within the ACC. There'll be some activities that could be identified as a gap and there's a need to address it, but it may not be appropriately positioned at the ACC. That tells us we got to do it somewhere else then. The question will be where? But it's driven largely by the ACC analysis. Obviously, the outcome of that first round of analysis will then inform the next step, which is in 27. We have dollars set aside in the capital forecast for design services. And so this is now taking the information coming out of the public consultation realm, creating block plans in terms of how the space within the ACC, as we know, can be redemised, purposed, which when approved by council would then lead to the next step, which is the detailed design drawings, which will be in a form suitable for tender to go to marketplace. Because in 28, in our capital forecast, we actually have notionally identified the physical undertaking of whatever that adaptive reuse would be in terms of the interior renovation work. And that renovation work would be focused on making sure we have a truly barrier-free building, which goes right down to the washrooms, as well as passive travel. It would be upgrades to our life and public safety aspects in the building. The HVAC system, so that there's proper heating and cooling, now recognizing for season use of the entire building, as well as creating that new indoor amenity space for whatever those future programmed areas would be. So you're transitioning to warm side, recreation, leisure, and cultural programming, starting now through the engagement process, 27 design, 28 construction. And that's all contemplated in your 10-year capital forecast, a major undertaking. Construction alone is approximately $6 million. Council has significant investments in this capital forecast related to 4 bridges. North Dumfries is blessed with wetlands and riverine systems. They add to our geography and the interests of our community and our countryside. They're a curse when it comes to traffic circulation, but also the infrastructure related to those crossings. In 26 is the footbridge. It's underway with work scheduled to be completed mid-November 2026. But in 27, you have two bridge projects. You've got the Main Street Bridge crossing at Jedburgh Dam, as well as the Shellard Road Bridge. Council may remember in April, brought a report. We talked about some emergency repairs that were necessary, and we accelerated the time frame for the actual refurbishment of that bridge being 27. So both Main Street and Shellard, the consultant GEI, is working diligently on those engineering drawings for those two bridge projects, as well as securing the requisite permits to facilitate that renovation project so that we can go to the marketplace at the end of this calendar year to undertake the refurbishment of both bridges in 2027. You're looking at almost 1.7, 1.8 million as a global cost attributed to those two bridge projects. Piper Street was supposed to be in 27. We moved it to 28 because we reshuffled because of the Shellard Bridge. So in 27, we'll be doing the design work, permitting work to inform a 2028 construction and refurbishment of the Piper Street Bridge over the Nith River. Those bridges, I'm including footbridge into this analysis, generates around $6 million worth of capital costs as an aggregate value. Road infrastructure. So this could be including streetlights, sidewalks, road and stormwater management. I have focused on the three biggest envelopes. You probably have about 18 different projects in the forecast. I'm focusing on the big three just for the purposes of brevity. The major reconstruction of Hall Street from Northumberland to Main Street, slightly over 1 kilometer in length. You are looking at traffic calming, sidewalks, for the first time, proper storm drainage system with an outlet to the pond at Main Street, at Hall Street, and new street lighting, a comprehensive rebuild in that older part of the village, recognizing we have a significant number of heritage resources on that road, which unto themselves require special characteristics to be deployed not only in design, but when we're actually constructing to ensure that we don't have a causal impact on vibration, as an example, on some of those buildings. Artificially brings the cost up. In 2032, it's the reconstruction of Manley Street and McDonald Street. Once again, an older part of the village, and it's a complete reconstruction of the road system. Stormwater, new sidewalk, street lighting, road bed, road surface, okay? With Butte Street being done this year, Manley Street, McDonald Street, and Hall Street all being knocked off, you have taken care of all of the older roads in the village, and you have largely undertaken then, in the previous 7 to 8 years, plus this forecast, all of your roads in the urban area of Ayr, either through road construction or road resurfacing. Fire department. There are actually several pieces of rolling stock being purchased in the 10-year capital forecast as they go through their life cycle. However, I wanted to focus on two because they happen to be the largest acquisitions and they're in the front end of the capital forecast. The first in 2028 is the replacement, and it's a true pumper rescue where we try and combine multi-functions into one piece of rolling stock. It's around $1.1 million to acquire that truck. we will actually be looking at going to the marketplace for competitive bids at the end of this calendar year, given the lead time it takes to get bids, as well as manufacturing, so that in a truck arrives in 2028. In 2031, we are taking out of service, it will be a 20-year-old pumper. And once again, with that multi-dimensional aspect of trying to blend different focuses to rolling stock as a cost containment item, it's what we were going to refer to as a quint apparatus, which means 5 different components are built into that truck: transportation, pumping, ladders, an aerial device. So given the built form that's emerging in the community, whether it be on the non-residential or on the residential, we are introducing a 75-foot high water tower and ladder on the pumper apparatus vehicle to create the quint apparatus. Over $2 million. Cheaper than buying 2 different vehicles, but it still takes your breath away. Once again, roughly 18 months to 2 years in advance of that delivery date, we'd be going to the marketplace because of the lead time for its manufacturing and ultimate delivery commissioning. We did have an understanding originally to have a gently used quint in our earlier capital forecast, but because of supply chain disruptions in that host municipality, their apparatus took over 3.5 years to be delivered, and they weren't able to release the truck when they had hoped. And therefore, it became unattractive at the back end of the life of that vehicle. We'll continue to see if that opportunity exists going forward, but right now we have costed out if we had to go to the marketplace and buy a quint apparatus. Parks and outdoor amenities. We're spending approximately $9.8 million over the forecast period. And this is basically developing new parks in some of the emerging subdivisions. It's going into some of our older park facilities, and specifically in the rural settlement areas, and reinvesting, upgrading those facilities. We did Oakwoods Park. Clyde Park is now largely completed. We've got some final commissioning to sort out, but those 2 parks were our first forays in terms of significant investments, and it was done in partnership with the respective communities. Roseville and Branston, we've had those rounds of communications and engagement with the respective neighborhoods. We've got some early concepts, and those 2 parks are now identified in our capital forecast. Those are part of the $9.8 million spend, along with things like a cricket pitch, multi-court lit pickleball courts, and investments in off-road trails in varying locales. So I'm going to, at a very, very high level, talk about each of the spreadsheets that make up the 15 pages of the attachment to the staff report. So Schedule A was the fleet rolling stock. And this is broken down by each of the departments. So fire department, administration, public works, and rec. Obviously, where possible or practical, we're trying to look at hybrid vehicles. We have not included any true electric vehicles in our forecast. Council adopted in 2025 fleet management policy. And for varying reasons, in terms of how long we hold on to our vehicles, the technology available in the present period was not attractive for the true electric vehicle fleet. But that may change in the back end of the decade. The price points may come down, the technology may improve. We would adjust the fleet management policy accordingly. I mentioned earlier, the forecast is a living document and we adjust as new information becomes available. The composition of the fleet could evolve accordingly. We do have the majority of the expenditures for the fleet are life cycle replacement of vehicles and rolling stock and rubber tired equipment. However, within the forecast period, there's 3 additions to our fleet that are attributed to growth, which would be funded through development charges in terms of their one-time capital costs. So there is identified in the forecast and a single axle dump truck in 29, recognizing the growing inventory of roads in urban air principally. A 3/4 ton pickup truck for public works. And there is a bylaw, and that's in 2031. And in 2029, we see the roster expanding for our bylaw enforcement with additional full-time complement. And so there would be a second bylaw enforcement vehicle to recognize the expanded staffing complement. We have already accounted for, obviously, the winter maintenance equipment that was rolled out in 2025 as we brought more services in-house related to the sidewalks and the parking lots. Those have now been reflected and carried throughout the 10-year capital forecast. So you can see roughly 52% of our capital spend for rolling stock goes toward public works. Fire department is next at 35%. Is the contributions to either the reserves and or the expenditure. Recreation is next at 11%, and then administration, which is building and bylaw, is approximately 2%. Schedule B is studies, small tools and equipment, and software. We have been making an effort to purchase electric powered small tools to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And as that technology continues to improve, I think the next quantum will probably be in the lawnmowers. I'm thinking of our wide deck type lawnmowers. As that technology in terms of either its performance or hours of service improve, we'll continue that migration. But our hand tools, chainsaws as an example, we're migrating over to electric. A lot of our new hand tools for the fire department, extrication tools and sisals and the like, have migrated over to electric in the form of battery powered interchangeable packs. Township has made significant investments in core software packages for various departments. They were done to promote, obviously, integration, promote efficiencies, and remove and in time reduce the need for physical paper. We do have a significant expenditure shown in 2027, which is the replacement of the financial software package. It was purchased in 2016, and in 2028, it comes to the end of its operating license. It will no longer be supported by the vendor. Significant investment, both in terms of capital outlay, but also migration from one platform to the next.
What an idea about the cost.
We are carrying $250,000 for that new financial package, and then there's the licensing cost beyond that. The operating license is in the operating budget, but this is the one-time capital contribution to actually physically buy the package and have the data migrate and rubber sheeted to fit between the 2 generations of software. Obviously, we have a series of technical studies that inform our 10-year forecast. Things like the OSIM, which is inspections by every other year on our bridge structures and major culverts. Life cycle facilities, which is obviously looking at our buildings and the major building components and their estimated life cycle. And with that, there are recommendations typically related to energy efficiency or AODA improvements. State of the infrastructure, so this takes many different folds. Council is very familiar with obviously our road system and how that informs our prioritization of roads, both by function as well as state of condition. It prioritizes or triages and gives us a general order of magnitude of cost and timing. But the other one is our stormwater management system. And if you take a look at our infrastructure, stormwater management, you will see council's going to start spending a lot of money on stormwater management network starting this year. We are doing the clean out sediment in the Jenkins Pond. We've awarded that contract and start very, very shortly. But we are also undertaking significant investments in some of our smaller, more isolated ponds like Wainless and Wadham, Hunt. And in the middle part of the forecast period, our larger facilities are Robert Simone and Vincent Drive. This is partly done to ensure the proper performance of those stormwater management facilities, and specifically in recognition of some of these major storm events we're getting, and making sure that our systems have the capacity to handle, or better positioned to handle, the runoff of storm water in these events. And then there's the continual replacement and maintenance of key elements of the township's information technology core infrastructure architecture. So our IT coordinator has basically audited all of our buildings, has coded each little piece. Like that Wi-Fi repeater as an example, it's got a shelf life. We've got a schedule now in terms of not only looking at our core systems like our firewall and our server, but it's all these components that feed off of it across our inventory of buildings. And we have a number of public spaces, which have both a public and a private Wi-Fi connectivity, but that infrastructure has to be maintained. It's got a shelf life, and there's a replacement element. That's now populated through your 10-year capital forecast for the first time that are true because of the in-house resource that we brought into the township earlier this year. Infrastructure, Schedule C. This is your biggest cost center, if you remember, about $52 million over the 10-year period, focusing on stormwater management, sidewalks, street lights, roads, and bridges. We have added the Shellard Road project. If you remember council in April, we moved that forward to 2027. That design and permit work is presently underway. Stormwater management projects have been updated and populated at strategic intervals through the 10-year capital forecast. And we've made a significant commitment, both in terms of delivery of projects, but also, if council remembers, when we did the asset management plan in 2025, contribution to reserves for stormwater management, understanding that growing exposure and the delivery needed to ensure that those systems and functions grew. Where possible and practical, we're incorporating new stormwater management practices into our road projects. Butte Street, which will be starting construction this year in the next couple of weeks. There's a significant new stormwater management system to deal with the chronic ponding issues we've had there. Council will remember in 24-25, the project's undertaken on English Street and at the intersection of Thompson and English Street. Two separate projects, but major investments were undertaken. The chronic ponding problems that we've experienced are no longer present there. Sometimes this is incorporated into a larger road project. In other cases, it's a standalone project unto itself. But we're trying to position ourselves through this investment to obviously renew our stormwater network. In part because of either the age of the facility or the inadequacy of the facility. But it's also trying to better position the corporation to adapt and mitigate against the influences of climate change. In 27, you will see there's a design exercise to look at a storm system for Earl Thompson. We have significant hard surface properties that flank Earl Thompson. And with these heavy rain events, almost 100% of it is running off into our ditch system and causing significant erosion to the ditch system, which then complicates things at the end of the ditch in terms of sediment and the storm detention facility at the extreme south limit of Earl Thompson. We need to get in front of this because the issue is only going to get worse, and we're constantly going out and doing remedial fixes, but we've never addressed the fundamental. 27, the engineering exercise, and then 29 is dealing with that storm system so that we don't have these continual operating cost implications. We continue to look at trying to transition from gravel roads to some sort of hard top surfacing. Majority of that network is a shared aspect with our friends along the county of Brant, save and except when the road project is growth related. In other words, the change or the driver for the improvement is attributed to growth. It's funded through our development charges. Okay, so sometimes it's a partnership with our friends in Brant County because it's a boundary road. And other things, it's our cost that's largely then development charge funded. And each section can be treated differently depending upon what the motivator is. But the premise is moving away from the gravel road surface, partly because of increased costs for operations, grading, because the traffic is increasing, grading because of more rain events that are very high volume of rain over a compressed period of time, and it's causing erosion on the gravel surface. Or it's people who want no dust on a gravel road. And so given our drier summers, the frequency of having to put down calcium is increasing. So because of all these different factors, the more we can convert over to a hard top surface will in time reduce risk. We're also making improvements into the profile of the road, but also potentially lowering our annual operating costs. Keep the roads in a state of operating condition.
Speeding will be a greater problem.
Speeding, however, will be the consequence.
Yeah.
Not that people are driving slowly on the roads today, even on a gravel road. Obviously, the primary focus has been on the Brant Waterloo section, which is our largest connectivity in linear kilometers of gravel road from Trussler Road right through to Spraggs Road. And then Reedsville Road between Wrigley and Brant Waterloo Road. Those sections in sum represent about 85% of our gravel road network by linear length. They're captured in some form or fashion in your 10-year capital forecast. Ongoing traffic calming projects. Sometimes these are small things like flashing signs, more signage. In other cases, it's actual modulation to the road surface by either narrowing the road surface, putting speed humps, or other similar treatments to modulate. This township has invested actually a significant number of dollars in traffic calming in the past 3 to 5 year period. And on certain sections of roads, it has made a difference in terms of the travel speed. And in some instances, it's actually discouraged certain types of traffic, which wasn't supposed to use that road corridor in the first place because it was a no truck route. So it's had the combination value. Some of these improvements that we talked about are not right and appropriate for every section of road. It's gotta be strategic, and it's gotta be appropriate in the context of where those traffic calming approaches would be deployed. But there's a significant investment proposed on traffic calming, both in terms of when we do a road reconstruction project built into that, but then our standalone projects themselves. Schedule D is facilities. Council, remember, this is the second biggest capital spend area in the 10-year forecast. And obviously, it looks at your bricks and mortar, both in terms of new builds, adaptive reuse or renovations to existing buildings, life cycle replacement of major building components. We have made some changes to the sequencing of tasks. Some got moved forward because of funding from external partners. Some got pushed back because growth slowed. And therefore, the need for some of those facilities, while still required, because the growth slowed, so did the need for the enhanced facility. So it's been scaled accordingly. Not surprising, recreation is the biggest component of the spend in the forecast period. And that is largely attributed to the Roseville Community Center, the Air Farmers Mutual Community Center, the Air Community Center, and the library. Remembering Township is responsible as the property owner for the major building components and the life cycle replacement of those major building components. We're replacing the HVAC system on that building in 2027, as an example. So 60% of your capital spend for facilities is in that grouping of leisure and community services. Public Works is next at 36%, and that's almost exclusively for the latter phases of the improvements coming out of the master plan for the depot itself at 1168 Greenfield Road. And the last is our friends at 501 Scott Street at the air station for the fire department at 4%. The last schedule is parks and trails. This is made up of new parks that are largely attributed to growth in the emerging subdivisions, principally located within urban air and the expanded urban air boundaries. But it's also rehabilitation of our rural settlement parks. As I mentioned previously, Oakwoods Park in Browns, Clyde Park within Clyde are now largely been completed over the 25-26 time period. And our focus is now on Roseville and Branston. But it also is continued refurbishment of play structures across all of our parks. Generally, our life cycle schedule is 12 to 14 years on the climbing apparatus across all of our parks. We have a series of trail connections, both on-road and off-road, in the forecast period. Some of these would be on lands currently controlled by the Grand River Conservation Authority, where either through land transfers or lease, the township would be able to get access to those properties and undertake the connectivity pieces of those off-road trail systems, largely a naturalized type trail, just recognizing the environmental sensitivity of these numerous parcels. And then, as I mentioned earlier, new parks and parkettes that are largely within the planned growth areas of urban air, and those are largely funded through development charges. And we've made adjustments to the delivery schedule of those parks, once again recognizing that growth is slowed, parks are still needed, but the delivery period has been pushed out later into the decade accordingly. That's a summary of each of the spreadsheets and their purposes. However, there's things that are not in the capital forecast. The council, in one fashion or another, has had its fingerprints on, and we haven't landed on an answer, a cost, or a time period. However, they're out there. And at some point, they'll work their way into the capital forecast. What they may look like, how much the order of magnitude costs, I don't know. But they're out there and there will be reports coming to Township Council. I'm quickly summarizing them as heads up. We need to resolve these things. And they've got a capital exposure. The Niftville Bridge. Council may recall, this is the old trestle bridge that straddles the Nith River. And it once upon a long time ago connected Nith Road to Piper Street. The bridge was decommissioned and taken out of service decades ago. It is failing. We've had some assessments undertaken. And as part of the 26th bridge review, we're having that information updated. The connection as a road is impractical. But perhaps the bridge with improvements or removal of the bridge, but utilizing the concrete abutments and placing a new pedestrian bridge on the old abutments may be a potential answer as part of a looping off-road trail system. And if that is ultimately the direction of council, then a portion of that could be recovered through development charges. Water Street. Township Council, as recently as Monday night, deferred a decision on whether or not to keep whether or not to declare these lands as surplus for municipal purposes.
How deep are we gonna get into this?
Very, very high. It's a principle, it's not a decision point. So with that decision to defer, we have, on an interim basis, self-financed the acquisition of that property at approximately $1.25 million and drawn money out of the reserve that would have been utilized for a series of other projects in the 10-year capital forecast. When you look at certain accounts, and look at the land reserve account, because I tried to consolidate. So we used whatever was in the land reserve account, which was approximately 550,000. And it shows now as a negative. In other words, I've overspent in that account by the tune of about 900,000, because I had 180,000 that was approved for property related matters in the operating budget this year, drawn from the land reserve account, plus the 1.25 million approximate to acquire 10 Water Street. So because that money is in a negative balance, I've had to use from other accounts in the 10-year period to fund that bill. Depending upon what comes out of future discussions, will influence the capital forecast. And that's a decision for the next term of council. But it's out there. I reported that on Monday night. I'm putting it into this presentation because I couldn't put it in the staff report. That's part of your agenda package because that was written last week and released publicly last week. So this has been updated as just in time coming out of Monday night's council meeting. The potential for a museum archive per gallery. I have consciously and purposely kept it separate to 10 Water Street because there's been no decision as to a location. So certainly that has been one of the potential locations discussed, but it is in the idea of a museum archive or gallery is independent because it could go potentially anywhere. However, not knowing where and the magnitude of it, it is not identified in the capital forecast. On June 22nd, council asked the North Dumfries Historical Preservation Society, do you want to take a business case assessment? That process will help inform these capital commitments and potentially inform a preferred destination in terms of where it might go and what scale, and then obviously the order of magnitude costs. In the big picture then, generally speaking, you have a balanced 10-year capital forecast, but you don't have a lot of freeboard in your 10-year capital forecast based upon what we know as external contributions to the forecast, OSIF, gas tax, Grand Bridge, aggregate reserve. Works on the premise of a continuation of a 3% contribution annually through the tax levy to reserve accounts to fund the 10-year forecast. In that big picture, largely your 10-year capital forecast is funded. But what I'm saying is, in that forecast, you can see the reserve continuity for each of those topical areas. You will see some accounts get very drawn down. There's not a lot of freeboard. We don't know what prices may do. You may remember the sticker shock of 22 and 23 coming out of COVID. Certain prices went way out of whack. Well, it really affected our reserves. We were fortunate we had money that we could account for that shock. But this works on what we assume to be pricing. And if there are significant one-off variances, having some of those extra latitude in your reserves helps cushion that. Or things happen. Sheller, Bridge happened. You had, because you had money in your reserves, and the ability to move it up a few years. You have very little wiggle room. And I tried to flag a couple of other unknown projects that haven't been accounted for in the 10-year capital forecast. One or more of those, based on the assumptions of the 10-year forecast as today, will influence what's left. And it could be meaning to delay one or more other projects if they're platooned in, reshape or scope one or more of those projects in the forecast, and or say, yep, we're going to advance this, but it's contingent on external government funding or sponsorship, donation, or some combinations thereof. Okay. The forecast is based on certain principles that have guided us to date and has assumed a certain modeling similar in approach going forward. Okay. So, in closing, we're here to embark upon a discussion. No decisions are being made today. We're asking council, big picture, have we got the strategy correct as an approach? Does council see the need to drop certain projects in the forecast? Modify or scope projects? Delay or extend the timeline for the completion of projects? Identify projects that would only be advanced if there's some form of tied external funding. And I'm going to suggest senior levels of government. Because right now in the forecast, we've only identified one project that's tied to senior levels of government funding. And that's the adaptive reuse of the ACC. And out of the $6 million exposure, 1 million. We've taken a very conservative approach. The signals coming out of senior levels of government is they're also tightening their spending patterns, or they're targeting it on very narrow scope of projects to enable, as an example, either major economic investments like rail corridors, terminals, or housing enablement. Projects that council may want to add to the forecast that aren't presently identified. So, Madam Mayor, more than happy to answer any questions in the report, any of the spreadsheets. But this is now council's opportunity to assist staff.
If I may, before council starts, I think at AMO, we should be really pushing some of the ministers who have considered giving us money for certain projects. We have to get that commitment. We don't know who's going to be in office down the road, whether the conservatives will hold the province or not. I need a commitment.
I'm not too sure some of the cabinet ministers you're going to meet with at AMO will be either cabinet ministers or in that portfolio come the fall.
I don't care. I want the commitment. I want it in writing. I don't care who's in the chair.
Because we know there's going to be a cabinet shuffle.
But we have to do what we can.
And you do have this series of delegations, including with the Ministry of Finance on 2 items.
And we have to be strong. Councilors, suggestions?
No, Mayor, I was just, I had a question that had to do with if there's any signals that there would be anything coming from provincial or federal government. And I think CAO answered that well, so I wanted to contribute, but he's already answered it well.
Councilor Rose.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For you to staff, I'm noticing that there's a number of projects that are kind of moving out. One is like the big one that I've noticed, the Public Works Department, because of the development charges related and the lack of growth or the slowdown of growth. For these projects, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to understand when we're moving them out because development charges are not what we anticipated when we first put them, or whether we're moving them out because we've had to just reshuffle internally where we put things. For example, I think for like the Roseville Park and Branch Park, were moved out, I think, a year or so.
But they're not growth related.
Right, so this is where I'm sometimes a bit confused about why we've decided to move certain projects out versus.
So in the case of Roseville and Branchland Park, they were moved out 1 calendar year as part of the February submission to council.
Yeah.
And that's because they were being funded almost exclusively out of the Parkland Trust. Well, growth has slowed, so the cash in lieu of Parkland, the contributions to the Park Trust account also dropped. So what was being held in the Park Trust account wasn't able to cash flow some of those projects unless we show an alternative funding source. That's why it was pushed out. Now to dates. So this was the February 26th. We had kept the dates. It was in the February documents, what's shown here in the draft August document. And Roseville and Branchton. So we have detailed design in 28 for both projects. And then we grouped from a capital perspective, hoping that it's one contractor doing both parks. Delivery in 29 for both. But it's largely because the Parkland contribution, which is tied to growth, specifically in the institutional, commercial, industrial sector. That's our largest contributor toward the Park Trust account. The contributions have dropped from what was originally modeled.
Thank you. A lot of that I was looking to think about, just my next question, probably through you to staff as well, maybe, is so a lot of the things that we're trying to move and trying to balance. Some of it like is stuff we just kind of need to do. Gonna need to fix the bridges. We can't let them collapse. But other things, I'm just looking at the ACC reuse. Do we have wiggle room to consider moving that out a year and determine whether or not there's any savings or opportunities in that way to maybe grow our reserves a bit more before we delve into it? Or is that also a project that is pretty much like and I know kind of it'd be sad just kind of leave the building kind of, we saw the cultural stuff there, but like there'd be a piece of the building that wouldn't be usable for everybody here, but that's
Yeah, so it's driven by a couple of factors. One is just the optics of having 85% of the building idle. And there's a cost just for the privilege of having the address in the building. We still have to heat it, cool it, clean it, secure it. Even if we're only using the front portion, being the community hall. There's a cost to the balance of the property. There's the optics of having a vacant building with the pent-up demand that we're starting to see for certain types of activities and not having the appropriate space to meet that growing demand. The other is there is a federal program that's capped for adaptive reuse at about 1 million. So the government of Canada, as part of their Building Canada Fund, which was announced in this most recent budget, talked about funding over the 10-year period, but it's all front-loaded. We were not eligible for intake 1 because we were not shovel-ready. We do our design work in 27, which is right now in the forecast, coming out of the community consultation, which we're going to be doing now and into early 27. We would meet the tests of being shovel ready because we have to be complete by 29. And given the scale and scope of the work, we got to do the design work in 27. The construction phase would be 28, spilling into 29. Because remember, their fiscal year doesn't align with our fiscal year. Theirs is March 31st, 29. So largely, we've got to have it mostly undertaken in 28. So it's partly to capture what we hope to be that federal grant. Not yet applied for because we're not eligible in intake 1, but we're trying to position ourselves for intake 2.
There's also the people that we are paying not to be there. So, the repairs band and
Well, they would be in the community center as of the end of September.
Okay.
Because once the exterior rehabilitation is finished,
Okay.
the community hall can be opened and used. Ice surface, we start getting ice at the end of September to be ready for Thanksgiving for our ice users. I'm looking at once the ice is retired, that building, I'm talking about the non-community hall space, really isn't conducive to be used unless you go through the rehabilitation, because it's heavily influenced. There's no air circulation. It was an arena, so there's no heating or cooling, right? So you're not going to use that as a dry pad in the heat of July without making that improvement to that space.
They used to.
What about grants? What about going to the Parliament?
As I've indicated, the only grant that's been talked about in
Is
the
the
provincial and federal budgets, we've accounted for. We're not eligible because we don't meet the criteria in this very moment in time. We have positioned pieces so that we're eligible for intake number 2. But I don't know what exists in the future because the government has only articulated in this immediate period. And we've tried to work within the context of understanding the ground rules buried in their respective budgets.
And there'll be a new minister of sports,
Yes?
which I hope is good for Jim.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have another question. And so I see the ice house is in our forecast. It doesn't look like there's much planned for it at the moment, because it is just kind of this. It's difficult to come up with a plan for this type of building, but it's also just kind of sitting there and is a bit of a, in one sense, would be just be a liability. Can we just leave it sitting there? Or like at some point, we have to fix the roof again, and I don't, like, structurally it seems okay right now, but and the grounds in front of it, the old lawn bowling grounds, like when do we see us having an opportunity to actually look into maybe doing something with it or figuring that out?
So right now, council has approximately $150,000 in reserves set aside for air ice house refurbishment, undefined. We have undertaken a structural assessment it was approximately 2 years ago or 3 years ago. The building was deemed to be structurally sound. There's been no further deterioration in the skin of the building. So it is, it can deal with the climate, snow and rain as we know it today. It is, continues to be, and will always be heavily influenced by floodwaters associated with storm events with the Nith River. And depending upon the significance of the storm event, that building sits like an island in the middle of floodwaters. And that won't change, regardless of whether we renew the building or not. Because it's in the floodplain, it significantly impacts what can happen in the building. No one has identified an end use for the building. So to some extent, what are you investing in? Is it to restore the building and try and go back to the period architecture? Doors and the window trims, the exterior skin instead of the top coat that exists today, is trying to restore some of that stonework. Is it going back from an asphalt shingle, which was a fix back in 2013, 2014, to a cedar shake shingle? And is there going to be any interior component done? Because right now, we have only modeled based on the exterior skin, not anything on the interior, because there's nothing been identified as a practical interior use. And that's limited to some extent just by the physical space inside the building. Walls are thick, it was stored blocks of ice. So while you look at it from the outside, it's about 75% smaller inside because of the thickness of the walls, because they were the insulation for the ice blocks that were carved out of the Nith River during the winter seasons. And you got the heavy influence and the periodic frequency of flooding for the Nith and water, wastewater. Can't put plumbing with a septic system in the floodplain. So we're looking at a private pump to collect. If you put a washer in there, so if there's a place of employment, they want to go in there, they say that they're going to be above the floodplain, they still have to have a washing facility for their employees. So now you have this sanitary outfall with a private pump. And we're pumping either to Stanley Street or Northumberland to go into the sanitary sewer and water. Water is not as big a deal because it's under pressure and it's just bringing the water service to create potable supply into the building. Sewage will be a significant element.
Years ago, GRCA told us that we could only put you could store canoes in the home. That's all we could use it for. Councilor Owen.
Madam Mayor, so through the CEO, to follow up on the ice house, I mean, I don't wanna have to admit this, but if we're never going to restore that building, is there a mechanism that we could explore with the region to donate it to the Ken Sealing Museum, to their heritage village, have them relocate it? Because at least then it would continue on. They could somehow or other, through funding, recreate that. It is one of the last remaining ice houses in Ontario. We might have more prominence there. People might have to be able to see it and look at it, as opposed to languishing behind our downtown blocks. I just hate to see this building sitting there forever, never going to be restored, eventually fall down to the ground. I know moving a stone building is gonna be super difficult, but is there any approach that we can make to them and see if they'd be interested in this?
So on a couple of aspects, Council has designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, recognizing its unique cultural, architectural, and community significance. That hasn't changed. That protects the building, and we have a responsibility as a property owner. The reserve contributions were meant there to facilitate some of those exterior improvements to restore elements of the past architecture of the Air Ice House. But the discussion had always been, well, let's tie it in when we know what's gonna happen in the building. And so it's that end use that has been the logjam. Okay, I don't think it's the commitment to continue to protect the building in its integrity. I have not explored practicality of moving that structure off-site. Okay, we had a structural assessment that looked at, was the building safe and secure and stable in its present location? Full stop. We did not ask the structural engineer about how would one move this building to an alternate site, whatever that ultimate destination could be. So that has never been explored, and I don't know the feasibility or the order of magnitude cost. I have not spoken to the region about whether or not the Air Ice House could be moved either to the Concealing Museum, Dune Village, or comparable sites, or even a third party, if there's a landowner that has great passion about heritage and, you know, incorporating it onto perhaps land that they would dedicate or lease that's outside the floodplain. Those discussions have never been pursued. They may be pathways. The current location just creates certain challenges. Some of them we cannot overcome. I can't get away from the floodplain or the influence of floodwaters.
You want to look at options? So the council's asking to explore options. Council Mills.
Earlier, I think so. I think it's been kind of sitting around on our books for a very long time and just sitting there. If the option is just, hey, let's take that $150,000 and see how far we can renovate the exterior. I think that'd be a great start, to be honest. Like, right, then at least that'll be something that people can look at and say, hey, wow, that's actually really cool. Might help attract some more tourism. I don't know, like there is.
So you're talking about renovating it and keeping it here now?
Yeah, I'm talking about renovating, I'm not sure how you do a huge block like that, but
But
it is
last
interesting.
time was in Roseville. Do you remember that? Aunt Margaret and Curry got it.
Yeah.
It was a house in Roseville. It was designated one of the oldest houses in Dumfries. And it was going to be torn down and Margaret and Curry and her husband bought it and they moved it up to the, and it's in the property.
It's excellent.
Both
Yeah.
drive.
My house is a little bit different.
Yes. That's what I
My
wrote.
scale and weight.
Yeah,
And I-
I wonder if we tried to move it. It would crumble.
It was, yeah, Madam Mayor, though, I think it would be great to see at least a couple options explored. I just feel like it's just kind of been sitting there and.
So, can we explore, trying to stabilize it or take care of the outside to see if that will stabilize it and know where it is?
So we have stabilized it. Okay, so other than the influences of flood water, okay, we haven't put any money into improving the exterior facade to recapture some of the period architecture to the building. So is that what council's ask is? What would be the cost to for lack of a better term, deliver on exterior architectural improvements to the Part 4 designated building? Because we did have discussions, I apologize, I cannot remember the name of the school in Niagara, but it was a school that taught apprentices how to restore and point period architecture heritage buildings. And we were trying to use it as a classroom instruction, as a practical, to offset, lower some of our capital exposure. Now, the individual who was championing the school had retired in the interim period. I haven't, rekindled those discussions, but that's something that we did discuss 5 years ago. There was some interest, but it never manifested itself into an end, of course. There could potentially be some federal heritage preservation dollars. Generally, that kind of program has been more aligned with the federal government than the province. That may be an exposure that could assist. So there's different tools or instruments that could help roll the township dollars. But if that's council's direction, one of our closeouts tonight could be a resolution directing staff as part of the development of the 2027 budget to look at approaches, methodologies related to the exterior restoration of the Part 4 designated airhouse building.
And I will email the mayor of Lincoln to find out what that school is.
Yeah, I apologize. I can't even remember what community it was in.
I'll check with him. Councilor Larson.
So just to add to that, if we're going to kind of look at what we're gonna do, the ice house. I wouldn't wanna simply stop at the exterior. From what I understand, we would only be able to use from the level of Northumberland Street up if we were to do anything.
Correct.
How would that utilize as a museum? Would that work on multi-levels from that up?
It's not that big an area, and by the time you start, if you go multi-level, now you have to have stairs. And that's gonna take even more space out of that small interior cavity. I really don't think from a practical perspective, it would work well for a museum, partly because of the barrier-free component in terms of access to a public space.
Right.
Partly because of the washroom facilities that have to go in there and the complications.
I've never been inside, so I don't know how big it is.
It's not that big interior.
And we can always look at the lawn bowling building to renovate it for the museum.
Oh, I think we can definitely look at, put the lipstick on it, make it
That's what I think it's.
historical lipstick, if you will.
So this
but
is
make
all
it
just
look like-
research. I don't think we want to put them in the 10-year capital forecast until the new council meets, or you do want.
If I understood correctly, the direction was for just staff to investigate and come
Yes,
back
that's
as
what we
part of the
want.
27th
Yes.
budget.
Yes.
It's not committing to a project. It's not putting a time period or a dollar value. It was to inform 27 discussions.
Okay, we're
Did I
gonna go.
interpret that correctly?
We're gonna go forward with the motion, and Ashley, you will please write up the motion for the ice house. So Councilor Williams, you have the motion.
Oh, and I'm terribly sorry, and one more question.
Go ahead.
So a lot of the numbers that we have here, especially as we get further on, is based on certain population expectations. If that growth doesn't happen, what is there, does that mean we just keep on deferring some things like the public works depot? Because they could also say at some point, the current sand dome is going to have to get replaced anyways.
There will be certain projects that you can only push out so far before it becomes impractical.
Yes.
The sand dome is gonna be one. You know, we've invested into the building recently, we've extended its life. But at some point, you can't push it out any further, so no longer being driven by the extra capacity that's needed for the storage of winter material. It's because, do you really want to put money into an older building that's undersized? And you're never gonna get the true value amortized out of your investment. The sand dome's gonna be one. We are approaching that outer envelope in the forecast. Other things like the new parks in the subdivisions. That is scale
Thank you.
based on. And it's not, if subdivision isn't built, or it's not happening as quickly. Then you wouldn't want to put the park in prematurely. So that truly is scalable. And it could move ahead or be pushed out depending upon how growth occurs. Okay. The rolling stock, so the extra single axle dump truck, as an example, is truly scaled to growth because of it's tied largely to the demand of extra centerline kilometers of road. Okay. And that's why we go through this annual review of our capital forecast and we make adjustments based on some of those realities.
Do you want to do the motion there, you please, Council Williams?
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Lowman, that council directs staff that as part of the development of the 2027 budget to explore approaches, methodologies, and costs related to the exterior restoration to the Part 4 designated air ice house structure.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Can we go on with the motion then? I believe Council Williams shall for that, please.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Tilly, that FIN report number 18-2026 be received and that staff submit for consideration of the November 9th, 2026 council meeting. Report on 2027 capital projects that staff seek to secure pre-budget approval for to facilitate an early entry into the marketplace for bids on long lead delivery or price sensitive projects. And that all comments received through the discussion of the August 12th special council meeting be returned to staff for further consideration as part of the continuing development of the draft 2027 budget and the associated 10-year 2027-2036 capital forecast.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Council Williams, the legal next motion about the bylaws.
Moved by myself, by Councilor Ossner, that the following bylaw be read the first and second time. Number 3671-26 being a bylaw confirmed to the council August 12th, 2026.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. And Council Roth, would you like to say, please?
Moved by myself, second by Council Williams, that bylaw number 3671-26 be read a third and final time and signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. And the adjournment, please, Council Terry.
Moved by myself, second by Councilor Roman, that whereas business before this council meeting has been completed at 8:21 p.m. And be it resolved, this meeting is adjourned.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you.